another episode of Adventures in Contracting. I am Leona Charles, CEO and President of SPC Business Consulting, where we do all things government contracts. And today's episode is hot. So we are talking about DC Public Schools, 13 separate contracts that they sidestepped the district council to award a total of $113 million worth of contracts. So in the district, contracts that are valued at $1 million and over are required to go through a process where they go to the district council for review and approval. So what we have here is DCPS has been skirting this requirement for the past few years. So let's get into it. So there are 13 separate contracts at hand. What has been really, I think, kind of putting salt in the wound is there are two contracts in particular that are valued at allegedly about $42 million with Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen. And it's bringing these old wounds out into the open. So in 2016, there was a vendor for DC Public Schools which provided their lunch program, their meals for lunch programs. And that vendor, Chartwell's Dining Services, was accused of having rotting food and fraud. So they were accused by DCPS's Food Services Director, Jeffrey Mills. They admitted no wrongdoing, but they did have to pay a lawsuit to Mr. Mills in the amount of $19 million. So after paying this lawsuit, Chartwell's Dining Services then said, okay, you know what? This contract is not for us. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. And you guys can kind of do what you do and figure it out, but we're not going to play anymore. And then they exited the district's contract, which left the district in a bind. So Q, Sodexo, Magic, and DC Central Kitchen. So the district and the school district felt like they were under the gun, like they had no choice but to grant these contracts to Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen because the Chartwells had left in such a hurry, didn't leave any continuity planning done, and we're just kind of like out of there. And so they have to feed the kids. They have to provide lunches. It's a federal mandate. So they didn't really have a choice. They had to go into a contract with Sodexo Magic and DC Central Kitchen. So in February of 2022, here's kind of where the wounds are continually getting opened. 7 News in DC released a report of parents complaining of unidentifiable food items and edible items. Sodexo acknowledged these issues with the quality of their food, but they blamed new staff, training, and of course the pandemic. So there are a couple things going on here, but we all know that in schools, there's a federal mandate that they provide lunches. They have to reach a certain nutrition level, and Sodexo didn't do that. It doesn't really get into a lot about DC Central Kitchen, but it does talk a lot about Sodexo, and the complaint talks about a little bit about kind of where the district is coming from. And so the council's perspective is that, listen, this is not a new rule. You know, if a contract is over $1 million, it's got to come to us. We've got to review it. You know, it's largely performative. Most likely, this has been hashed out during the budget year. So most likely it's going to be passed, but it does need to come to us. We need to review it. We need to have a hearing on it, and we need to approve it. The council stance is that since 2019, they've only received 8 contracts from DCPS. I mean, they have seen something, I don't remember the exact figure, but I think it's something like 1,500 contracts from all of the other agencies. And the district has something that is a bit quirky too. They have what's called independent procurement authority agencies. So what this means is that the district has a central procurement agency, which is the Office of Contracts and Procurement. And anybody who is not an independent agency has to go through the Office of Contracting and Procurement, which they call OCP. OCP handles all the procurements, handles the awards, the evaluations, everything having to do with it. DCPS is an independent agency, meaning that they have their own procurement regulations that they follow. They don't necessarily have to follow OCP's requirements. So DCPS Chancellor Lewis Ferrebee has claimed, hey, I put my hands up. it was, those things did happen. They shouldn't have happened. It was a complete and total mistake. It just seems like, some of our procurement professionals were using the pandemic waiver, and they thought that that waiver was still in effect and they could continue to award the contracts without them having to go to council. And I understand this argument. I do think it's a little bit disingenuous. The reason that I think it's disingenuous, and I actually side with Council Mendelson on this one, is that you've only sent eight contracts to council so far, and that's since 2019, since well before the pandemic. And as a procurement professional, someone who kind of lives and breathes rules, regulations, policies, I just find it hard to believe that someone, especially not a someone in leadership or a contracting officer, would not have said, "Hey, you can't, you can't do this. This waiver is very specific. It's for a finite amount of time. That time is expired. Now these things have to go through the traditional channels." I find that really hard to believe that no one in procurement knew the limitations of the pandemic waiver. So the council does have limited authority here. The most they can do is kind of slap a hand and say, "Hey, you have to do that," and there's a little infighting. What they do have the ability to do, however, is they do have the ability to put a bill together and put a bill through council that will require DCPS to no longer be an independent authority. It will require them to go under OCP, and that's exactly what's happening. They're putting into council a bill that will require DCPS to come back under OCP's purview. And with that, these kinds of things won't go away. There are a couple of things to consider here. One of them is that mistakes do happen in procurement. You've got a lot of contracting officers who, there's more work than there is contracting officer bodies for, let's be honest. There Contracts in general has a lot of turnover because it's a high stress field. And regulations change constantly. So on the one hand, there's a possibility that they did not know that they could not use the waivers for what they were doing. I don't think that's likely, because you have legal counsel in your agency. Everybody has a counsel in their agency. And I just am hard pressed to think that counsel would not notice that. And also, I've not met a contracting officer in my career who has not said to me, "Where's the reg on that?" Like, if you're going to do something, generally they're requiring a justification that provides them with some CYA ammunition, which usually comes in the form of a regulatory analysis or policy analysis, or a reg or a policy that says, "Yeah, we can do this. This is how we're interpreting it, and this is what we're relying on." So the chancellor had some interesting responses to why it's happened. Obviously, one was that the staff thought they could use the waiver. Some other ones he gave were that there's a lot of staff turnover, and he admitted that DCPS lawyers don't review every contract before it's executed. That's a huge flag for me. I think as a chancellor, as an agency director, that's probably not something that I would want to cop to. If my counsel is not reviewing everything, that's not something that I would want to cop to. But also, when you're running a ship the size of DCPS, I don't know that I'd want to instill that type of non-confidence in my leadership if it were me. So, interesting case, a lot going on. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, if they are in fact going to bring DCPS under OCP, or if they're going to leave it as an independent procurement agency. We shall see. I think that if you've only gotten 8 contracts since 2019, I think that they've proven that there is not the ability to manage their contracts workload in a effective manner. And I think that they have shown that they are also not up to the task of self-policing. That's my take on it. This is a really interesting situation. Fortunately, it's not that shocking, but I will love to see what they do. I agree with the council that it should be pulled back under OCP, where at least it can get some oversight and it can get some visibility, and at least it will have council that is reviewing the contracts. Well, thank you very much for listening to this episode. You can find us on SoundCloud, YouTube, Buzzsprout, at Adventures in Contracting, or SPC Business Consulting. Till next time, see you.